Welcome to Crisis in Perception, where we examine the systems shaping our world.
It is, it's really great to be here. And today we're doing something that, well, it might feel a little bit like time travel at first, but I can promise you it is going to feel uncomfortably relevant to the headlines you're reading right now.
Yeah, we are heading back to 1719, London. And usually, when you think of that era, your brain probably goes straight to period drama.
Right.
You know, the powdered wigs and polite conversation in drawing rooms,
Oh.
horse-drawn carriages. We tend to think of it as this very rigid, very structured, polite society.
Which is exactly the image we are sold. But if you actually scratch the surface of London in 1799, you don't find order at all.
No.
You find the Wild West. Or I guess more accurately, you find the absolute birth of the modern system. We're looking at the exact moment when the source code for modern institutional power was actually written.
The actual blueprint.
Exactly. Finance and policing and the media, it all coalesces right here.
And to do this deep dive, we are looking at a specific grounding source. We are using the novel A Conspiracy of Paper by David Liss. I have to ask right off the bat, why a novel?
It's a fair question.
Because usually on this show, we are digging into white papers or academic history or dense economic texts. Why use historical fiction to map out a real-world system?
Because sometimes fiction captures the actual feeling of a system a lot better than a dry textbook ever could.
Okay.
David Liss isn't just telling a mystery story here. He is meticulously reconstructing the economic and social engine of the South Sea bubble. He is showing us how high finance and organized crime were essentially born as twins.
Born as twins. I like that. They aren't opposites.
Not at all. They are mirror images of the exact same incentive structure. And our guide through this whole mess in the book is the protagonist, Benjamin Weaver.
Or as he was actually born, Benjamin Lanza.
Right. And Benjamin is the perfect lens for us.
Why is that?
Because he's an outsider on multiple fronts. He's a Jewish man in a fiercely Christian society, which immediately puts him on the margins. And he's estranged from his family.
And his family is deeply involved in all of this, right?
Yeah, they're wealthy stock jobbers, traders. So he knows the world of high finance intricately, but he isn't truly of that world anymore. Plus, he is a former bare-knuckle pugilist.
A boxer.
A boxer who has turned into a quote-unquote thief-taker.
A thief-taker. We should probably clarify what that actually is right away for you listening, because this is not a policeman.
No, that is a incredibly critical distinction to make. There were no police in 1719 London.
None at all.
No Scotland Yard, no beat cops walking around blowing whistles. None of that existed. If someone broke into your house and stole your silver candlesticks, the government simply did not care.
It wasn't their problem.
Exactly. You had to hire a private contractor to track down the thief and get your stuff back for you. And that contractor is a thief taker.
So Weaver is essentially a private investigator, but with a license to break kneecaps if he needs to.
In a way, yeah. But because of who he is, this outsider, this former fighter, a man who has to navigate the really muddy, desperate streets of St. Giles one minute and then walk into the marble halls of the Bank of England the next, he sees things clearly.
He crosses the boundaries.
Right. He sees the connections between those two worlds that everyone else is actively ignoring. He is basically the glitch in the matrix that allows us to see the code of this system.
Okay, so let's get into phase one. Let's talk about that code, the actual design. What is the hardware of this world being built in 1719? Because the book makes a really big deal about the shift to paper.
Hence the title, A Conspiracy of Paper.
Right.
To understand the massive underlying anxiety in this book, you really have to understand how value worked up until this point. For thousands of years, value was physical.
Tangible.
Tangible, yes. If you were wealthy, you had land. Or you had a heavy iron chest full of gold and silver coins. Value had actual weight to it. You could pick up a coin and bite it to see if it was real.
It existed in the physical world.
But in the late 1600s and early 1700s, that fundamental reality changed. Britain was fighting these massive, incredibly expensive wars, specifically King William's wars against France.
And wars cost money.
Unbelievable amounts of money, way more money than the crown could possibly tax out of a mostly agrarian peasantry.
So the government is basically running out of gold.
They are completely tapped out, so they do something genuinely revolutionary. They invent the national debt.
Capital N, capital D.
Exactly. They start selling paper, annuities. The pitch is essentially you give the government 100 pounds of physical gold today, and the government gives you a piece of paper.
And what does the paper say?
It says, we promise to pay you a percentage of this back every single year forever.
So they aren't selling a product. They are selling a promise.
They are literally monetizing the future. And you have to put yourself in the shoes of someone living back then. This created a massive psychological crisis for the public.
I can imagine it's a huge leap of faith.
Weaver's uncle in the book, Miguel Lienzo, has this incredible speech where he just lays the whole crisis out. He says, if money and gold are one and the same, then gold defines value. But if money and paper are the same, then value is based upon nothing at all.
Wow. Value based on nothing at all.
Just collective belief.
It really sounds like an existential crisis. Because if your value is just a promise from the government, and let's face it, governments collapse, governments lose wars, then your entire wealth is basically a hallucination.
It's the ultimate anxiety of abstraction. And stepping right into the middle of this societal anxiety are the two major institutions of the novel.
The corporate giants.
Right. The Bank of England and the South Sea Company.
Now, I feel like if you pay attention to financial history, you hear the phrase South Sea Bubble a lot. But I don't think I've ever fully grasped the mechanics of it. Was it just an early company that got way too overhyped?
It is so much more cynical than just a hyped-up company.
Okay, break it down for us.
So you have the Bank of England. They were the establishment. They were deeply aligned with the Whig political party. So that's the merchants, the city financiers, the progressives of the time. The bank managed the government's massive debt.
So they had the monopoly on the government's money?
They did. But then you have the Tories, the rival political party. These were the old landed gentry, the country squires, the aristocrats. And they looked at the Whigs getting incredibly rich off managing this debt, and they wanted a piece of the action.
Naturally, so they needed their own vehicle.
Right. So they essentially create the South Sea Company.
So it wasn't just a business, it was a political rival to the Bank of England.
Exactly. It was a rival bank, but it was brilliantly disguised as a trading company.
Disguise?
Oh, yeah. Ostensibly, the pitch to the public was that the South Sea Company had been granted a monopoly on all trade with South America.
Okay.
Spices, gold, textiles, slaves. That was the outward narrative. Buy our company stock, and you will get fabulously wealthy from all this rich South American trade.
That sounds like a solid business model on paper. What's the catch?
The catch is massive. Spain owned South America, and Britain was actively at war with Spain.
Wait, so
no British ships were actually sailing to South America.
none at all?
Zero. No ships, no trade, no actual product moving. The South Sea Company was quite literally a shipping and trading company that couldn't ship or trade a single thing.
But the stock price is going up.
It was soaring, absolutely skyrocketing.
How does a company with zero revenue and zero product have a soaring stock price?
Because its real business wasn't actually trade. The trade was just a story. Its actual business was financial engineering.
Explain that.
The South Sea Company was aggressively offering to take over the national debt from the government. They were trading their incredibly inflated stock for government annuities. So people were buying the stock strictly based on a story. A fable.
A fable of new finance.
Precisely. It was pure profit without product. This is arguably the first major time in modern history where we see this specific mechanism fully deployed. A corporation realizing that managing the perception of its stock price is actually vastly more important than doing any real business.
That feels incredibly modern.
Doesn't it?
You look at some of the tech valuations today or crypto, and it's the exact same architecture.
Totally. But while these wealthy, quote-unquote, gentlemen are playing these high-stakes paper games in the coffee houses of Exchange Alley, there is this whole other completely connected system running parallel in the underworld.
Right. The shadow institution. We have to talk about Jonathan Wild.
Jonathan Wild. He styled himself as the thief-taker general.
Which is an amazing title to just give yourself.
It really is. And in the novel, he is the primary antagonist. But historically speaking, he is a deeply fascinating real person. He essentially invented what we now call organized crime.
How so?
Yep.
I mean, obviously crime and theft existed in London before 1719.
Of course, crime existed, but it was disorganized, it was wildly chaotic and highly inefficient. A street pickpocket would steal a gold watch, they'd take it to a fence who would buy it for absolute pennies on the pound, and then the thief would just drink the money away that night.
It was just small-scale survival crime.
Right. Wild looked at that chaotic ecosystem and he saw massive inefficiency. He decided to completely corporatize crime.
So he became the CEO of the London underworld.
That is exactly what he did. He set up a literal physical office in London. He called the Office for the Recovery of Lost and Stolen Property.
The Office for the Recovery of Lost and Stolen Property. That sounds completely legitimate, like a public service.
It sounds like the lost and found desk at a local train station.
Exactly.
But here is how his actual business model worked. It was a closed loop. Wilde secretly controlled almost all the major gangs of thieves in the city. So let's say his guys steal your very expensive family heirloom watch.
Okay, I'm devastated. I've lost my watch.
Right. You are devastated. You go to the local magistrate or the parish watchman, and they basically shrug at you because they have no investigative power.
So what are my options?
Word on the street tells you to go to Mr. Wilde's office. So you walk in, you sit down at his desk, and you say, "Mr. Wilde, I have been robbed of my grandfather's gold watch."
What does Wilde do?
Wilde plays the part beautifully. He acts incredibly sympathetic. He pours you a drink and says, "Oh, that is just terrible, sir. The streets of London have become so incredibly dangerous lately. But I might just happen to know some unsavory men who operate in the area where you were robbed."
He plays the well-connected middleman.
Exactly. He says for a small administrative fee, let's say £20, I can reach out to my contacts and attempt to persuade them to return your property.
So I pay him £20 because I want my watch back.
You pay him. A few days later, miraculously, he, quote unquote, finds your watch. He hands it back to you. You are thrilled. You probably think this guy is a local hero.
Meanwhile,
he takes a cut of that £20 you gave him, and he pays it to the exact thief who stole the watch from you on his orders in the first place.
he is completely running both sides of the transaction.
He created the demand by ordering the theft, and then he sold you the supply by selling you the recovery.
That is a brilliant and terrifying system design.
It is, but here is the real kicker that makes him so powerful. What do you think happens if a thief out on the street decides they don't want to work for Jonathan Wilde anymore? Or what if an independent thief steals a watch and tries to fence it outside of Wilde's monopoly?
I'm assuming there's no HR department to handle that grievance.
No. Wilde uses his highly public status as the respectable thief-taker general to completely legally arrest that rogue thief.
Wow.
He turns the rogue thief in to the actual government authorities. He then collects the 40-pound government bounty for capturing a known criminal. And that thief goes to the gallows and hangs.
That is diabolical. He is literally using the state's legal system to strictly enforce his own criminal monopoly.
And this right here is where the systems analysis of this book gets so incredibly interesting. The novel is actively asking you to look at Jonathan Wilde's operation and then look at the directors of the South Sea Company side by side.
And compare them.
Yes. Wilde manages a carefully constructed flow of stolen physical goods. The South Sea directors manage a carefully constructed flow of imaginary government debt. Both of them rely entirely on maintaining a strict monopoly.
And both of them rely on the public trusting that they are solving a problem.
That they themselves actually manufactured out of thin air? Yes.
It is the exact same underlying architecture. The only difference is one guy is wearing a tailored velvet coat in a boardroom, and the other is wearing a slightly dirtier coat in a tavern.
That's it. How is the only difference?
So that perfectly lays out the design. We have a system built on imaginary value and another built on manufactured crime. Let's move into phase 2, the incentives. Because if you build a machine like this, what kind of behavior does the system actually reward?
Well, one thing it definitively does not reward is hard work or tangible production. It doesn't reward honesty.
It actively punishes those things.
Exactly. It completely rewards the manipulation of perception. It rewards extreme volatility.
Explain the volatility part.
Yeah.
Why do they want things to be volatile?
This is something Benjamin Weaver has to learn the hard way as he infiltrates these spaces. He goes into the famous coffee houses and exchange alley places like Garraway's and Jonathan's Coffee House, where all the trading actually happens.
The trading floors of the 1700s.
You're right. And he sees all these wealthy men just screaming at each other over stock prices, sweating, panicked, elated. And Weaver has this realization. These men do not want economic stability.
Because stability is flat. Stability means the price stays at exactly £100 day after day.
Right. If the stock sits at £100 for a solid year, nobody is making a massive overnight fortune. To get rich quick in this new system, you fundamentally need the price to swing wildly.
You need a roller coaster.
You absolutely need chaos. You need the price to crash suddenly so you can buy at the absolute bottom, and then you need it to abruptly soar so you can sell at the top.
And what happens if the market is just naturally calm? if there isn't any chaos happening.
Then you manufacture the chaos. And this brings us to one of the most brilliant subplots in David Liss's book, the incident with the pretender invasion.
Oh, yes. I love this part of the book. Walk us through this. So, just for historical context, the quote-unquote pretender is James Stuart Wright. He is the exiled Catholic claimant to the British throne, the guy who wants to sail over with the French army and kick out King George.
Exactly. He is the ultimate existential threat to the current British government. If James Stuart invades and actually wins, the Bank of England is completely finished.
Because a new king isn't going to honor the old king's debt.
Never. The entire national debt would be canceled instantly. All of those annuities, all of that paper credit that everyone is trading, it literally becomes worthless confetti overnight.
So even the slightest rumor of a Jacobite invasion is the ultimate market-moving event.
It's the nuke. So in the novel, we have this character named Percival Blothwaite.
Great name.
Very Dickensian, right? Blothwaite is a highly respected director of the Bank of England. He is an absolute pillar of the London community. Very wealthy, very high status. But Weaver discovers during his investigation that Blothwaite had secretly over-leveraged himself. He desperately needed a massive infusion of cash.
So what does a respected bank director do when he needs cash?
He commits treason for profit. Blothwaite hired stagecoaches. He hired literal theater actors.
Like putting on a play.
A literal stage play performed out on the public dirt roads leading into London. He had these actors dress up in authentic French military uniforms and Jacobite rebel outfits. He had them ride at breakneck speed through the small towns surrounding London, screaming at the top of their lungs that the Pretender's massive army had just landed on the coast.
He faked an invasion.
He faked an invasion. He also had anonymous letters sent directly into the coffee houses in Exchange Alley claiming the exact same thing, that the Catholic army was marching on London.
And the market traders, how do they react?
Total, unabated panic. It's a complete meltdown. Every single person in Jonathan's coffee house is utterly terrified that their paper annuities are about to be zeroed out by a new king.
So they sell.
They sell everything they have at fire sale prices.
Yeah.
The stock prices absolutely cratered within hours.
And Blothwaite.
Blothwaite calmly sits there in the coffee house and quietly buys up all of that dumped stock for pennies on the pound.
Wow.
And then, of course, a few days later, the actual government scouts come back and say, false alarm, there are no French troops. It was just a weird rumor.
And the prices just snap right back to where they were?
They instantly recover. And Percival Blothwaite quietly pockets a historic fortune just off the difference.
That is, I mean, today, obviously, that is highly illegal. That is textbook market manipulation. The SEC would have you in handcuffs by Friday.
Right. But is it illegal in 1719? Or is it just considered providing liquidity to a panicked market? There was no SEC. It wasn't explicitly illegal yet. It was just considered, quote-unquote, sharp practice.
But look at the structural incentive there.
Exactly. Focus on the incentive. The system fundamentally rewarded Blothwaite with immense, unimaginable wealth for intentionally terrorizing the entire British public. It financially rewarded him for destroying the public's perception of reality.
It literally makes the truth a massive financial liability. Because if you just walk into the coffee house and tell the truth, hey guys, everything is fine, the king is safe, you make absolutely zero money.
Right. The only way to actually win the game is through information asymmetry. You either have to legitimately know something that the public doesn't know yet, or you have to successfully make the public believe something that is entirely false.
And this reliance on perception, this completely extends to personal identity in the book too, doesn't it? Because Weaver spends what feels like half the novel just agonizing over changing his clothes.
Identity is just the social version of the currency. You really have to remember this is an incredibly rigid class-based society. Weaver is Jewish. He is a former bare-knuckle boxer who used to beat men bloody for coins. In the eyes of a proper gentleman, he is basically dirt. He is absolute lowest tier status.
But his job requires him to get highly sensitive financial information from these very high-status elitist bankers.
So he has to mask. He has to completely perform an identity that isn't his.
He buys the expensive outfits.
He puts on the freshly laundered, clean linen. He wears the decorative gentleman's sword at his hip. He actively forces himself to moderate his voice so he doesn't sound like a street enforcer from St. Giles.
Because in this specific system, your financial credit, your literal ability to borrow money is based entirely on the visual appearance of your wealth.
It's the original fake it till you make it rule, but with legal stakes. Look at another character in the book, William Balfour.
Right, young Balfour.
He is a young gentleman by birth, but he actually has absolutely zero money. His family is ruined. He is actively drowning in secret debt. But what does he do every single day? He buys the most incredibly expensive imported wigs, he drinks the best wine, he casually gambles for wildly high stakes at the clubs.
Why does he do that if he's broke?
Because the second he looks poor, the flow of loan money stops. If he dresses richly, other wealthy people look at him and think, oh, he's a Balfour. He clearly has estates somewhere. He must be good for the money. And so they eagerly lend him more.
It's a literal Ponzi scheme, but built entirely out of personal reputation.
Exactly. And the moment you stop violently spending money to maintain that illusion, the bubble of your personal reputation bursts instantly, and you get dragged off to the fleet debtor's prison to rot.
It creates this terrifying societal trap where you literally have to lie to survive. Being honest about your finances guarantees your total ruin.
And this naturally connects to the darkest incentive built into this architecture, what we can call the clean hands doctrine.
Clean hands doctrine. Tell me about that.
We talked earlier about how the elite bank directors and the criminal mastermind Jonathan Wild are basically mirrors of each other, right?
Yeah, same system, different coats.
Well, the true elite in society, men like Lord Adelman or Percival Blothwaite, they cannot ever be personally seen doing the actual dirty work required to maintain this system.
It ruins the illusion of gentility.
It completely damages the brand. A director of the Bank of England cannot be seen in an alleyway breaking a debtor's legs or sitting in a tavern forging stock certificates by candlelight.
So they outsource the violence.
Completely. They hire layers of intermediaries to insulate themselves. They hire Benjamin Weaver to do their investigating in the slums. They hire ruthless thief-takers to aggressively enforce their debts. They use entirely shadowy proxy figures like Martin Rochester in the book to do the actual physical forging of the documents.
It's a bureaucratic layer of insulation.
It allows the major institutions to easily maintain this pristine veneer of complete legitimacy while simultaneously engaging in highly systemic criminal behavior. The actual physical violence and the risk are pushed all the way down the social chain to the desperate streets of St. Giles. But the massive financial profit from that violence flows cleanly right up into the boardroom.
That is a perfect transition into phase 3 then, the outcomes. We have a systemic design that is based entirely on imaginary paper value. We have incentives that heavily reward market manipulation, lying about your status, and outsourcing brutal violence. So what actually happens predictably when you let a machine like this run unchecked for a few years?
Predictably, you get the total normalization of structural fraud. The boundary line between what is a real asset and what is a completely fake asset just evaporates.
And Liss highlights this with a very specific plot point in the mystery. The counterfeit stock.
Right. Weaver discovers during his digging that there are highly accurate forged South Sea stock certificates secretly circulating through the market.
And it hits close to home for him.
Very close.
Yeah.
Miriam, who is his cousin and also sort of his incredibly complicated romantic interest, she unknowingly buys some of this stock. And Weaver looks at it and realizes, wait, this piece of paper is a forgery.
But this leads to what I think is the most fascinating philosophical question in the entire novel. Because if the real, authentic South Sea stock is already fundamentally based on a lie, remember, they have absolutely no ships, no trade, just a manufactured fable, then isn't the real stock also technically a fake?
That is the absolute crux of the whole crisis. If the legitimate state-sanctioned value is completely imaginary to begin with, then a forgery is really just a copy of a lie. It's a fiction based on a fiction.
And what is the outcome of that realization?
The outcome is that the massive institutions themselves actually stop caring about the difference between real and fake.
Wait, what do you mean they stop caring? They are a bank.
The book strongly implies that the top directors of the South Sea Company might actually know all about these forgeries circulating, or at the very least, they are so totally desperate to keep the public bubble inflating that they actively choose not to investigate it.
Because if the South Sea Company officially admits, hey guys, there's millions in fake stock out there,
both the panic instantly starts. And if the panic starts, the whole imaginary edifice collapses and everyone goes to prison.
So the fraud literally becomes structural. It's not a bug.
Yeah.
It's a load-bearing wall of the entire British economy.
Exactly. And you clearly see the ultimate outcome of this with the £3 million bribe.
Right. Explain that to the listener, because it sounds like hyperbole, but it actually happened.
What happened? The South Sea Company publicly offers the British government a massive £3 million quote-unquote gift in order to definitively win the exclusive contract to take over the entire national debt.
£3 million in 1719. That is an unfathomable amount of money.
It is astronomical. And it is just open, brazen government corruption.
But nobody treats it like a crime.
No, they treat it as brilliant corporate synergy.
Yeah.
It's institutionalized bribery. The sovereign state and the private corporation basically merge into a single, completely unregulated entity, and the main binding mechanism holding them together is normalized fraud.
Okay, so that's what happens to finance.
Yeah.
Another major outcome we need to look at is what happens to the concept of justice.
We touched on Jonathan Wild's monopoly earlier, but let's go deeper into the systemic outcome. In this world, justice isn't a right anymore, is it? It's a heavily commodified product.
It is entirely a product. There is absolutely no concept of equal protection under the law.
Okay.
That does not exist. There is only the recovery of private assets for a steep fee.
So if you are a wealthy merchant in the city and you get robbed,
You casually drop 40 pounds on Jonathan Wild's desk, and you purchase a premium justice package. Your goods are swiftly returned.
and if you are a poor laborer and you get robbed.
If you can't pay the recovery fee, you get zero justice. You just lose everything.
Yeah.
But actually, the outcome is vastly darker than just ignoring the poor. If you are poor, you frequently become the product itself.
How does that work?
Think about Wild's incentives. He needs to constantly publicly prove to the government that he is doing an amazing job as the thief-taker general right. He needs good PR.
Right, he needs to show he's tough on crime. So he essentially has a completely arbitrary quota system for executions. If you are a street thief who refuses to pay Wild his weekly tribute cut, or honestly, if you are just a totally innocent poor person who happens to be standing in the wrong alleyway at the wrong time, Wild will just frame you.
He just fabricates the evidence.
Completely. He uses his network of perjurers to swear you stole something. You get convicted instantly because he's a quote-unquote respected official. You get dragged to Tyburn and hanged. And Wild collects the 40-pound state bounty for keeping the streets safe.
It is the privatization of justice taken to its absolute most sociopathic logical extreme. The justice system is working flawlessly to serve the profit margin of the enforcer with zero regard for the actual truth or public safety.
None. And it perfectly leads into the darkest structural outcome of this entire system. And honestly, the one that feels the most historically persistent. The scapegoating.
Yes, the book deals very heavily with the pervasive anti-Semitism in London at the time.
It does. And we really have to make sure we analyze this structurally here. We can't just dismiss it as, oh, well, people in the past were just prejudiced. Systemically, prejudice performs a highly specific, highly necessary function in this architecture.
What function does it serve for this system?
Think about the public. When the economy becomes this utterly abstract, disconnected machine, when normal people are suddenly losing their entire life savings in paper stocks that they literally don't understand, or when the massive bubble inevitably starts to wobble, the public gets incredibly angry. They want to string someone up.
But they can't blame the actual mathematical system because it's deliberately too complex for them to understand.
Right. And they certainly can't blame the king or the aristocratic lords in parliament because doing that is literal treason and you will lose your head.
So the system desperately needs a lightning rod.
It needs a highly visible, vulnerable outsider. It needs the Jewish population. There's this incredibly telling scene in the novel set at a high-end gentleman's club. Weaver is quietly observing these two very wealthy, politically connected men, Sir Owen and Sir Robert.
And what are they discussing?
They are just casually over drinks discussing how these quote-unquote Jewish stock jobbers are completely ruining the moral fabric of England.
What is their actual economic argument, though?
Their argument is completely rooted in this false nostalgia. They claim that Jewish traders are actively replacing traditional manly British values, so things like owning physical land, having honor, doing hard agricultural work.
The old physical economy.
Right. They say these men are replacing those values with quote-unquote effeminate foreign values. Paper credit, wild speculation, shadowy trickery.
Which is the ultimate systemic irony because the Christian directors of the Bank of England and the South Sea Company are the ones actually engineering the massive paper fraud.
Precisely. They are totally projecting their own profound structural corruption directly onto the marginalized outsider. It functions as the perfect social safety valve.
Because if you could successfully convince the angry British public that the root of all their financial suffering is some shadowy Jewish conspiracy,
then the public will never turn around and look at the actual massive systemic corruption happening right out in the open in the South Sea boardroom or inside the House of Lords.
and this isn't just theoretical drawing room talk. This structural scapegoating has brutal physical consequences for people on the street, especially for Weaver.
Yes. It leads to the most painful scene in the book, the scene with the Tedesco peddler.
Walk us through that, because it's a huge moment for Weaver's character.
This is a totally crucial moment for understanding our deep dive today. Weaver is just walking down a busy street in London, and he sees this Tedesco Jew. Now, in this era, Tedesco referred to the Ashkenazi Jews arriving from Eastern Europe.
As opposed to Weaver, who is Sephardic.
Right. Weaver's family has been in London longer. They have money. They are somewhat assimilated. But this Tedesco peddler is poor. He is speaking Yiddish loudly. He looks and sounds very, quote-unquote, foreign to the British crowd.
He stands out.
And Weaver, who was born in Britain, who tries so hard to acculturate, who deliberately dresses like a high-status English gentleman, Weaver sees this poor peddler, and he feels this intense, sickening wave of internal shame.
Because he knows what the crowd is thinking. He wants to distance himself entirely.
His internal monologue is basically him screaming, "Don't look at me, I am not like this guy." He thinks to himself, this loud foreign man is the exact reason why the English hate us.
He blames the victim instead of the racist system.
Exactly. But then a British mob forms. They start violently harassing and attacking the peddler. And because Weaver happens to be physically standing nearby, the mob just arbitrarily turns and starts violently attacking Weaver too.
So all of the careful social distinctions Weaver tried to make in his head, I'm wealthy, I'm assimilated, I'm one of the good ones, none of that mattered to the mob for a single second.
It never matters to the mob. The structural system cleanly channels all of this complex, terrifying economic anxiety directly into physical violence against the marginalized group. It completely protects the elite architects of the fraud by intentionally sacrificing the vulnerable.
And that is the exact moment Weaver finally realizes that no matter how incredibly expensive his wig is or how perfectly he speaks English, the systemic math will always eventually use him as the scapegoat when the bubble inevitably pops.
Always.
So we have outlined a system that is fundamentally fraudulent, it is physically violent, and it is deeply predatory. Why does it persist? This brings us to phase 4. Why doesn't a system this broken just organically self-correct and collapse?
Because the simple truth is that legitimacy is the actual product being sold, and the sovereign state desperately needs that product to work. We really have to understand the concept of too big to fail.
Too big to fail. We use that all the time now.
People think that phrase was magically invented in 2008 during the subprime mortgage crisis. It wasn't. In 1719, the completely fraudulent South Sea Company literally held the British government's entire mortgage.
So if the South Sea Company goes bankrupt, the British government goes insolvent immediately.
Immediate sovereign default. If the paper bubble pops, the king suddenly cannot pay the British army. If the army isn't getting their wages, they mutiny. If the army mutinies, the Catholic pretender easily invades from France. And if the pretender invades, the Whig politicians running the country literally get their heads chopped off on Tower Hill.
So the government cannot allow the market to self-correct. They are physically held hostage by the fraud. They must actively support the illusion.
They have absolutely no other choice. And the elite financiers explicitly know this, and they weaponize it.
There is that incredible conversation Weaver has with Lord Edelman that perfectly illustrates this. Edelman is one of these extremely wealthy, highly connected investors.
Right. Weaver basically corners Edelman and says, I have the evidence, I know about the forgeries, I know about the murders, I am going to publicly expose the actual truth of what is happening.
And Edelman doesn't panic. He just coldly shuts him down with what you called the incentivized opacity argument.
Yes. Edelman essentially looks at Weaver and says, you need to stop your investigation right now, because if you actually expose this forgery, the South Sea stock prices will immediately fall.
Which is true.
Right. And Edelman continues, if the prices fall, the massive national debt cannot be funded. And if the debt isn't funded, the entire nation suffers and collapses. Therefore, Weaver, your insistence on telling the truth is actually an act of treason. Lying to the public is the only patriotic choice.
Wow. Lying is patriotic. Exposing the fraud makes you the enemy of the state.
It equated absolute silence regarding financial crime with literal national security.
No.
It is an incredibly powerful persistence mechanism. It structurally ensures that the fraud absolutely must persist until it becomes mathematically impossible to sustain 1 second longer.
You see that exact same mechanism deployed in modern bubbles, too. It's wild. Whenever someone questions a massive tech valuation or a crypto scheme, the skeptic is instantly treated as a malicious traitor.
Right. The community instantly attacks them. Why are you spreading FUD? Fear, uncertainty, and doubt. Why are you actively trying to hurt the community's investments?
And meanwhile, the community's investments are a complete mirage. And the leaders are quietly cashing out while aggressively telling everyone else to hold the line.
Exactly. It's the exact same script from 1719.
Okay, let's tie this whole massive architecture together. Phase 5, interconnection. Because David Liss goes out of his way to show that this isn't just about a few corrupt bank directors and a few street thieves. It is everything everywhere all at once.
Right. It's the concept of nested systems. Or as one character, Elias Gordon, famously calls it in the book, it's the spider web.
The spider web. I love that analogy.
Gordon tells Weaver point blank, quote, "Credit is a web you cannot see until you are already trapped in it," end quote. It connects absolutely every single layer of society invisibly.
And a massive part of that invisible web connecting everything is the media ecosystem, isn't it?
Huge, absolutely critical connection. In 1719, you didn't have 24-hour cable news. You had cheap printed pamphlets.
The pamphlets were basically the Twitter algorithm of the 18th century.
They were the exact equivalent. Anyone could cheaply print a completely unverified rumor on a piece of paper and have a street kid hand it out in Exchange Alley. And it would instantly move millions of pounds in the market.
And this ties directly into the core murder mystery of the book, right? Weaver's father.
Yes. Weaver's father, Miguel, didn't just trade stocks. He actually wrote a highly critical pamphlet exposing the system. The pamphlet was literally titled A Conspiracy of Paper.
And that's why he was murdered.
Right. Weaver spends the early part of the novel thinking his father was just randomly killed by a footpad for the gold coins in his pocket, but he wasn't killed for his physical money.
He was assassinated for his information.
He was killed because his pamphlet was a direct threat to the dominant narrative. The media ecosystem, these pamphlets, these manufactured rumors circulating in the coffee houses, that ecosystem directly drives the public sentiment.
The sentiment drives the stock price. The stock price directly funds the sovereign government.
Exactly. It is all one chain. So if you print a pamphlet that successfully pokes a logical hole in the narrative, you aren't just a literary critic. You are practically committing an act of economic terrorism against the state. So you get eliminated.
The interconnection also perfectly bridges the massive class divide, doesn't it? Weaver tracks the weapon used in the murder, starting from a desperate street thug in the slums of St. Giles, and follows the money trail all the way up into the mahogany boardrooms of Threadneedle Street.
This is the ultimate systemic reveal of the whole novel. The brutal physical violence happening at the absolute bottom of society is entirely funded by the abstract financial speculation happening at the very top.
They aren't two separate economies.
No, it is one single continuous living organism. You simply cannot separate the polite, respectable economy from the violent criminal economy. They literally share the exact same bloodstream.
And it isn't even just contained to London. It's a completely global spiderweb. A totally unverified rumor of a tiny border war in Spain instantly shifts massive amounts of wealth in London. A small naval skirmish involving a single ship in the colonies radically alters the price of tea and slaves in Exchange Alley.
It is the brutal, violent birth of modern financial globalization. Everything is instantly commodified and everything is connected by paper.
Which brings us to the absolute climax of our analysis today, the core question we always have to answer. We call this show Crisis in Perception. So looking closely at London in 1719, looking at Benjamin Weaver and Jonathan Wild and the completely fraudulent South Sea Company, what is the crisis in perception here?
The crisis is a fundamental, devastating category error by the public. It is a fatal misclassification of reality itself.
Break that down for you and me. What exactly are they misclassifying?
The characters in the book, and by extension the entire British public, they intrinsically perceive crime and finance as two completely opposite things.
Right. They think crime is dirty, chaotic, physically violent. It's something terrible that happens at midnight in the slums.
And they think finance is orderly, clean, mathematically rational. It is something highly respectable that happens at noon in beautiful marble buildings.
They view them as two entirely separate worlds that never touch.
But the structural reality that Weaver uncovers is that they are the exact same system.
The same machine.
Yes. Jonathan Wild's quote-unquote Office of Recovery is really just a completely unregulated bank for stolen physical goods. And the South Sea Company is really just an institutional fence for stolen imaginary value.
So the true crisis in perception is the public's naive belief in the mask.
Absolutely. The crisis is the blind societal belief in the facade of respectability. The public inherently trusts the expensive imported wig. They trust the gold leaf carriage. They trust the highly clinical financial terminology words like dividend annuity tranche yield.
Sounds so official.
It does.
Yeah.
But because they trust the packaging, They completely fail to see that the actual hidden mechanics running inside the Bank of England are completely identical to the mechanics running a back alley pickpockets gang.
It is entirely based on extraction through abstraction.
Which is exactly why attempting to moralize this issue completely fails to solve it.
Right, if you just look at this massive historical crash and you lazily say, oh, well, it's just caused by some greedy individuals, or it was those corrupt Jewish traders, or it was just the lazy, criminal, poor people, you completely miss the
You
point.
completely miss it because that kind of surface level interpretation deeply personalizes what is actually a systemic architectural issue. It totally ignores the underlying incentive design.
Because the design of the system makes fraud the absolute most logical, highly rational choice for every single person trapped inside it, from the starving beggar on the street all the way up to the wealthy bank director.
If you actively choose not to cheat the system, guarantees you will either physically starve to death or you will get aggressively bought out and ruined by a competitor who is perfectly willing to cheat.
So the only person who can actually see the system for what it is the person who lives between the cracks.
Yes. Weaver is the only one with actual systems visibility, and he only has it because he is entirely amphibious. He can breathe in the world of the slums and the world of the boardroom, but he truly belongs to neither of them.
He sees the structural continuity.
He is the only one who clearly sees that the politely stamped, heavily forged government stock certificate and the violently stolen gold pocket watch are literally the exact same thing. They are both just human value, completely detached from physical reality.
It really is a deeply sobering thought when you step back and look at it, because this massive architecture of artifice that they built in Exchange Alley in 1719, it isn't just some quirky piece of distant history.
Yeah.
It is the literal operating system of the world we live in today.
We are absolutely still living inside the conspiracy of paper. Right now, today. We completely rely on the exact same imaginary promises. We trade in the exact same layers of abstraction.
And we are definitely still struggling to see past the shiny facade of institutional legitimacy to actually understand the brutal mechanics operating underneath.
You still do it every day. We actively treat modern, quote-unquote, white-collar crime as if it is a completely different, vastly less harmful species than street crime. Even though a single systemic white-collar fraud destroys millions of times more human value than every pickpocket in the city combined.
It forces you to look at the headlines today and ask yourself, what are the modern fables we are eagerly buying into right now? And exactly who is manufacturing the systemic trust that we are blindly relying on?
That is the ultimate question you have to walk away with. And as Benjamin Weaver learned the hard way, the only real way to find the actual answer is to relentlessly look at exactly who financially benefits when you agree to believe the lie.
Crisis in Perception examines how systems shape belief and how better tools help us see clearly.
This project is free and publicly accessible. If you'd like to support the time, tools, and research behind Crisis in Perception, you can become a supporter on Patreon.
For a shorter visual overview of this topic, see the mini explainer linked in the description.
If you enjoy this kind of systems-level analysis, please like, subscribe, and comment with books or topics you'd like us to explore next.